It's going to be a quick example of a closure within JavaScript. So we're going to be incrementing a value. We're going to start by setting a starting value and passing it into our main function. And then within the function, we've got another function that contains the closure. And this is where we're creating the variable value, or the value that's going to be able to be accessed outside of the function itself. And as we see here, that the initial value is going to be 15, and then we're going to increment it by 2. So it's going to output a value of 17. And here we've got a loop. So we've got an incrementing value for x. We're adding that value of x to 2 plus 15, and that's where we're getting all these different values for the output. That's all coming up in this lesson. Let's create an example of a JavaScript closure where we're going to have an option to pass in a value that we're going to add to an ongoing count value. So go ahead and open up your editor. In this case, I'm going to create a function, and this function is just going to we'll call it adder. And within the adder, we can pass in a value within the arguments. And then this value can then be added to whatever the current value is that's going to be ongoing. And then we want to return the function in order to create the closure. So it's passing in a value into the function that's going to get returned back, creating the closure and keeping that existing value that we're going to be incrementing running count of the value. So it's automatically going to start, and by whatever number we're going to pass into as val is going to be the starting value, and we're going to continue to increment that. So this is going to be val2, and what we want to do is we want to return back the value of val plus val2. So this will give us our closure value, so give us a variable that's going to be living within the global scope, and it's going to be outside and accessible after the function has been invoked and after the function has run. So let's go ahead and we're going to create some values, and these are just going to be regular variables. So starting out with a value of a1, and this is going to run that adder function, returning back a value. So we're going to start it by having a value for the adder of a value of 10. So that will be the starting value. And then calling back into the function. So we're going to initiate the function with the starting value of 10 for val. And then as we invoke the functions that are contained within the adder function, and that's going to be where the closure gets created, we can then add to that value. So let's go ahead and we're going to add a value, or it's going to be actually a1, as this is going to be invoking the inner function within the adder function, creating the closure. So we want to add to this, where we're adding whatever value we want to add to it. And as we're console logging, that's going to log out the output. We can also create a for loop. So creating a value of x, and then we can loop through while that value of x is less than 10. And so what we can do here is that we can continuously invoke the value. So we'll have a constantly different changing value. So as we see, the closure gets created. We start out with a value of 10, and then the first function, or the first statement here within the console log, outputs a value of 2, so adding 2 to the value, and then all we're doing is we're incrementing it. I'm going to actually output it into the web page so it's more visible, so we can get it out of the console. So let's go ahead and we're going to create our output, selecting the element in order to create the output. And I'm going to use the query selector in order to select the element with an ID of output. So that will select that first element there, or the only div that we have within the page. And then we can use that and output content into it. So instead of outputting the value into the console, let's go ahead and we're going to select the output, and we'll have the inner HTML. So add to the inner HTML. I'm using the backticks. Those are the template literals. Output, and then you can use the $sign in the curly brackets to output the statement value. So that outputs those values, and if we want to create it within a separate line, because we're outputting the inner HTML, we can wrap the div around it. So now the output has been created on separate lines, but they're still holding a value of 10 because the value of the increment of x has been removed, and this value is always going to be 10 because what we're doing is we're setting and we're assigning the value of adder has a default starting value of 10. So if we were to update this and change this to 15, so that would give us a starting value of 15, and then we're adding 2. So let's update this value, and we're going to add x to it. So that gives us an incrementing value that we're using off of x and selecting the value that's hiding within the closure of the adder function, and it's being returned back. So this allows us to access that starting value, and then as we loop through, we're adding first off with the value of 2, then 3, then 4, and incrementing all the way up until the loop completes. So this is another example of how you can use the closure within JavaScript.